I was sitting in the doctor's waiting room, the smell of antiseptic heavy in the air, when my phone buzzed. I smiled, thinking it was Angela checking on me. But her voice came through sharp, cold and unfamiliar. "Mom, listen, Edward and I sold the lake house and the Cadillac. We needed the money for our trip to Europe. Don't worry. You'll be fine. Bye." The line went dead, just like that. No explanation, no comfort. My daughter, my only child, the one I raised alone after so many sacrifices, had discarded me like yesterday's trash. 40 years of working double shifts as a nurse, holding Robert's hand through hard times, building a family home brick by brick, gone with a 2-minute call. I felt every eye in that waiting room on me as I sat frozen, the phone heavy in my hand. My husband Robert had been gone 6 months. He died at our breakfast table, smiling, whispering, "Good morning, my love," before his heart failed. Since then, I believed Angela's smiles meant care, that her visits were love. Now I understood they were convenience. The lake house wasn't just wood and paint. It was summers of laughter, birthdays on the porch, Robert grilling fish by the water, and that Cadillac. He polished it every Sunday, humming gospel hymns as if it were a sacred ritual. My Angela knew what they meant. Still, she sold them. But what she didn't know was that Robert left me something. An envelope, a secret waiting in my dresser drawer, my lips curled into a strange smile. She thought she had left me with nothing. She had no idea what game had just begun. If it were you, what would you do? Forgive or take revenge? My name is Gloria Brooks, and I am 68 years old. For most of my life, I wore the white uniform of a nurse, clocking in before dawn and walking home long after the sun had set. 40 years in a city hospital taught me about pain, about resilience, about how fragile life could be. But nothing prepared me for the kind of wound that came not from illness, but from betrayal. I was born in Montgomery, Alabama, the third child of a factory worker and a maid. We didn't have much, but my parents gave us dignity and discipline. My mother used to say, "Gloria, what we don't have in money, we make up for in backbone." She was right. I carried that backbone with me when I moved north, chasing work and a better future. That's where I met Robert. He was a bus driver then, tall and quiet, with hands rough from turning the wheel all day. He had a laugh that filled a room and eyes that softened whenever they met mine. We built a life together the old-fashioned way, with sweat and patience. Our first apartment had roaches, but Robert promised me, "One day we'll have a house where you can plant roses out front." He kept that promise. After 10 years, we bought a small brick house in Chicago's South Side. I can still remember the day we signed the papers. Robert kissed my hand like we'd just won the lottery. And for us, we had. Angela was born in that house. I remember holding her so tiny against my chest and swearing I'd give her everything I never had. Nights when I came home exhausted, I would still cook, clean, and check her homework. Robert took her on long drives in that Cadillac, telling her stories about faith and hard work. She was the center of our world, our only child, our future. As Angela grew, I poured myself into her. I skipped vacations to save for her school clothes, worked double shifts to pay for piano lessons she quit after a year. When she wanted braces, we tightened our belts. When she wanted prom dresses, we sacrificed. Robert and I didn't care. We thought if Angela shines, then our sacrifices are worth it. Robert loved to surprise us. One summer, when Angela was 15, he drove us hours north to a small weathered house by Lake Michigan. "It's ours," he announced with pride. "The lake house." That place became our sanctuary. Summers were filled with grilled fish, gospel music on the porch, and laughter that echoed across the water. Even when money was tight, we kept that house, because it wasn't just property, it was memory, a promise that family came first. I thought Angela cherished those days. She would bring friends there, later boyfriends, and eventually Edward. I cooked for them all, washed their clothes, smiled as she paraded her life in front of us. I believed she knew what the lake house represented. The struggle, the triumph, the proof that love and hard work could build something lasting. When Robert passed 6 months ago, the ground beneath me cracked. He was the steady heartbeat of our family. That morning, we sat at the kitchen table like always. He poured my coffee, kissed my forehead, whispered, "Good morning, my love." Then his chest seized, his breath stopped, and just like that, my partner of 45 years was gone. I screamed until my throat tore, but nothing brought him back. Angela stepped in then. She came by 3 times a week, carried groceries, told me to see the doctor. She smiled and said, "Mom, you need to take care of yourself now that you're alone." I thought it was kindness. I thought it was love. I clung to her presence like a lifeline, believing Robert had left me one gift, a daughter who would stand by me. But beneath her sweet words, I see it now. There was calculation. She was circling, waiting, measuring what she could take. I didn't recognize it then. My heart was too broken, my eyes too clouded by grief. I saw only the child I had rocked to sleep, the teenager I had prayed for, the woman I believed was still my daughter. I was wrong. And the day I found out just how wrong, my world shifted forever. But before that revelation, I was still Gloria, the nurse, the widow, the mother who believed in her daughter above all else. That was my mistake. That was my weakness. And it nearly cost me everything. I remember the days when our house was alive with joy, back when Robert was still with me, when Angela was little and her laughter echoed through the hallways. Life felt full. I would come home after 12 hours on my feet at the hospital, aching and exhausted, but the sound of Angela's piano practice would bring me back to life. Even if she only played for a few months, those notes stayed in my memory like a hymn. Robert would tease her, saying, "Baby girl, you're the next Aretha," and Angela would giggle, cheeks flushed. Sundays were sacred. Robert would wash the Cadillac, whistling, while I cooked greens and cornbread in the kitchen. Angela would run in and out, tracking dirt on my clean floors, but I never scolded her too harshly. I wanted her to feel free, wanted her to believe our home was the safest place in the world. After dinner, Robert would sit in his chair with Angela on his lap, telling her stories about his own childhood in Detroit, about how his mama worked 2 jobs but never complained. "Respect your family," he'd say. "Everything we got, we earned. Don't ever forget that." The lake house was our crown jewel. It wasn't big and it certainly wasn't fancy, but it held our happiest moments. Angela learned to swim in that lake. She celebrated her 16th birthday with sparklers on the porch, friends crowded around a cake I baked from scratch. At Christmas, Robert would haul a tree all the way up there, even when snow covered the road, just so Angela could wake up to presents by the fireplace. We didn't have riches, but we had each other. I thought Angela loved those traditions. I thought they were stitched into her soul. But somewhere along the way, the shine in her eyes turned into hunger. When she brought Edward into our lives, I tried to be supportive. He was charming, smooth-talking, the kind of man who always had a scheme. I had my doubts, but Angela was in love, and Robert told me to let her live her life. We welcomed Edward at the lake house, let him sit at our table, treated him like family. I see now that was a mistake. Still, I can't erase the picture in my mind of Angela as a little girl, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, colouring while Robert read the newspaper. She would look up at me with those wide brown eyes and say, "Mommy, I'm going to buy you a big house one day." I believed her. That promise kept me going on the nights when I was so tired I could barely stand. Even when she grew into a teenager with attitude, slamming doors and rolling her eyes, I forgave her quickly. I told myself it was just a phase. When she got into trouble at school for skipping classes, I defended her, telling the principal she was under stress. When she said cruel things in anger, I swallowed my hurt. Because that's what mothers do. We love, even when it cuts us. After Robert died, I leaned on Angela more than I should have. Her voice, her presence, it felt like the only thread connecting me to the man I had lost. I cooked for her when she visited, made her favourite sweet potato pie, just to feel needed again. I mistook her convenience for compassion. Every time she smiled at me, I thought, Robert would be proud. But the truth was buried beneath those smiles. She wasn't visiting to check on me. She was circling like a vulture, waiting until my grief blinded me enough to sign whatever paper she placed in front of me. She was preparing the ground to take the very things Robert and I had bled for. If I close my eyes, I can still feel the warmth of Robert's hand in mine, the weight of Angela's head on my shoulder when she was small, the sound of her voice calling me Mommy. Those memories are sharp now, cutting, because they remind me of everything I gave. Every choice, every sacrifice, every dream deferred was for Angela. I built my life around her happiness. I believed love would be enough. I believed loyalty would be repaid. I believed my daughter would never see me as disposable. That belief carried me through decades. And it was that same belief that shattered me the day she proved me wrong. It began with small changes, the kind only a mother could notice. Angela's hugs grew shorter. Her phone was always in her hand, her eyes darting to Edward whenever I asked simple questions. "How's work, honey?" I'd say, and she would shrug, mutter, "Busy," and change the subject. She used to tell me everything, what friends said at church, which co-worker annoyed her, the silly dreams she had about opening her own business. Now she spoke in clipped tones, as if my curiosity was an inconvenience. One afternoon she came by with bags of groceries. Normally I would have been grateful, but the way she placed the bags on the counter felt different, transactional. "Here you go, Mom," she said. "Make sure you eat more vegetables. We don't want you getting sick." It sounded like care, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. Behind her stood Edward, leaning against the doorway, scrolling on his phone. He didn't even greet me properly, just nodded. I felt like a stranger in my own kitchen. Later that night, as I washed the dishes, I overheard them whispering on the porch. "She doesn't need all that space," Edward said, his voice low but firm. "It's too much for her. Selling the lake house would give us a real start in Europe." My heart sank. Angela didn't protest. She only murmured, "I know, but give me time. She's still grieving." I wanted to step outside and demand an explanation, but I froze. Part of me refused to believe what I'd heard. My daughter couldn't be plotting against me. She was tired, confused, maybe under Edward's influence. That's what I told myself as I went to bed, pulling the blanket up to my chin, trying to silence the dread crawling in my chest. A week later, Angela insisted on driving me to the doctor for a routine checkup. "Mom, you've been under a lot of stress. Let's make sure you're okay." She held my arm with a gentleness that almost convinced me, but I noticed how quickly she steered the conversation back to my house, my bills, my possessions. "Do you still have the deed for the lake house, Mom? It's probably a hassle to keep up with the taxes." I laughed nervously, brushing her off. "Your father always handled the paperwork. I just kept things tidy." She didn't smile back. When we left the clinic, Angela received a call. Her tone shifted instantly. Sweet but rehearsed. "Yes, everything's fine. No, she doesn't suspect a thing." I pretended not to hear, staring out the car window at the grey Chicago streets, but the words burned into me. That evening I sat alone in my bedroom, the walls heavy with silence. My eyes fell on the dresser Robert had built with his own hands, the one with the deep drawer where he used to stash his paychecks before we had a bank account. A memory stirred. 3 days before his death, Robert had pressed a manila envelope into my hands. "Gloria, put this in the drawer. Open it when you're ready, not before." I had forgotten. In the chaos of the funeral, the endless condolences, the numbness of grief, that envelope had slipped from my mind. Now it pulsed in my memory like a beacon. I opened the drawer with trembling hands, pushing aside old scarves until my fingers touched the worn paper. My name, written in Robert's careful handwriting, stared back at me. I carried it to the bed, my heart pounding. For a moment I was afraid to open it, as if the paper would dissolve the moment I touched it. But I thought of Angela's cold smile, Edward's dismissive nod, and I tore it open. Inside were documents. Thick stacks of them. Property deeds, bank certificates, investment records. And on top, a letter. Robert's handwriting flowed across the page, steady and strong. "My dearest Gloria, if you are reading this, it means I am gone. Forgive me for not telling you sooner, but I wanted to protect you from worry. Over the years, I invested our savings in ways I never spoke about. We own more than the lake house. There are 6 other properties, including the building where Angela lives, and shares in 3 companies. You are rich, my love. You always were, but now it is written in law. Everything is in your name." I gasped, clutching the paper as tears blurred the ink. My Robert, the man who had driven a bus for 40 years, had built an empire in silence. Every penny we saved, every sacrifice we made, he multiplied it without me knowing. And now all of it belonged to me. The irony cut deep. Angela thought she was stripping me bare, leaving me with nothing. She had no idea I was the rightful owner of everything she and Edward envied. She believed she was clever, but she was a child playing with matches in a house made of gasoline. The next day, Angela came by again. She walked through the front door without knocking, glancing around as if taking inventory. "Mom, you really should consider downsizing," she said casually. "A smaller apartment would be easier for you, don't you think?" Edward stood behind her, nodding approvingly, like a puppeteer satisfied with his strings. I folded my arms. "This is my home. Your father and I built our life here." Angela sighed, her voice dripping with impatience. "I just want what's best for you." What she wanted was written all over her face. Control, ownership, the keys to everything Robert and I had worked for. That night, I lay awake in bed, the documents spread across my quilt. The papers felt heavy, not just with wealth, but with responsibility. Robert had trusted me to protect what he built, to guard it against anyone who might misuse it, even our daughter, especially our daughter. The realization hurt more than I could bear. But alongside the pain, something else stirred inside me. Resolve. I would not be discarded. I would not be robbed of Robert's legacy. Angela thought she had silenced me with one phone call. She was wrong. She had no idea her mother was about to fight back. The envelope never left my sight after that night. I kept it under my pillow as if Robert himself were there watching over me. Each time I unfolded the papers, I felt both awe and terror. The deeds bore my name, Gloria Brooks, typed neatly, notarized, stamped. There was the lake house deed, the downtown condo deed, the title for the very building where Angela and Edward lived. There were bank statements with balances that made me dizzy, numbers I had never seen in my life, zeros upon zeros. Robert, my simple bus driver, had been a strategist, a silent architect of a fortune. I spread everything on the kitchen table like pieces of a puzzle. It was then I realized what Robert had left me was not only wealth, but power. For 40 years I had lived thinking we were barely scraping by, pinching pennies, clipping coupons, stretching meals, and all along he had been multiplying our sacrifices. I felt betrayed that he never told me, but also grateful. He knew me too well. He knew I would have worried that I might have revealed too much to Angela. By keeping the secret, he protected us both. The letter was short, but its words weighed more than gold. "Gloria, don't let anyone take this from you, not even Angela, especially not Angela. She must love us for who we are, not for what we have." I clutched that line until my hands trembled. He knew. He saw in our daughter what I had been blind to. He knew she had a hunger in her, a restlessness that might one day turn against us, and he had prepared for that. The next morning I fixed myself a cup of coffee and sat staring at the documents. For the first time in months, my tears didn't fall from grief. They fell from clarity. My daughter thought she had stripped me of everything, when in truth she had no idea what she was dealing with. That afternoon, Angela called. Her tone was syrupy sweet, the kind she used when she wanted something. "Hi, Mom. How are you feeling today?" "I'm fine," I answered flatly. Good, good. Listen, Edward and I wanted to let you know that we've transferred some money into your account. 30% of the sale from the lake house and the Cadillac. We didn't want you left with nothing. 30% of my own property. She said it as if she were doing me a favour. "How generous," I replied, keeping my voice calm. "When do you leave?" "This afternoon. Edward found a great investment in Europe. We'll be gone for at least 6 months, maybe longer if things go well. But don't worry, Mom. We'll help you find a smaller apartment when we get back, something that fits your needs, fits my needs." The words stabbed like knives, as if I were a burden she had to manage, not the mother who carried her through this world. When the call ended, I sat with the phone in my hand and laughed harder than I had since Robert died. The absurdity of it all nearly broke me. Angela believed she had control, believed she had reduced me to a poor, defenseless widow waiting for scraps. She had no idea I owned the very roof over her head, the walls she decorated with her expensive furniture, the floor she walked on with her designer heels. I opened my laptop and checked my account. Just as she promised, the money was there, an insult disguised as generosity. They had undersold the lake house, desperate for quick cash. They had sold Robert's Cadillac for a fraction of its worth. They thought I would be grateful. Instead, I saw it for what it was, theft wrapped in condescension. For the next few days, I walked the neighbourhood in silence, nodding politely as neighbours whispered behind my back. Poor Gloria, they said. Her daughter left her. Such a shame. Even Lorraine, my closest neighbour, looked at me with pity. Honey, if you ever need food or help, you come knock on my door. I thanked her, but inside, I burned. Let them think I was pitiful. Let them see a widow abandoned. It was the perfect disguise. That night, I laid the documents on the bed again and began to organise them into piles. Properties, companies, bank accounts. I pulled out a notepad and started writing. Ledger moment, lake house, legally mine. Sale fraudulent. Downtown condo, mine. Apartment building, mine, through Robert's company. Angela and Edward live here. 4 additional houses, scattered across Chicago. Bank accounts, balances totaling more than $1.2 million. Investments, shares in 3 mid-sized companies. I stared at the list, the numbers, the weight of it all. For decades, I thought sacrifice was my only inheritance. Now I had the means to crush anyone who tried to discard me. The decision formed in my chest like a flame. I would not run to Angela screaming. I would not beg for respect. No, I would let her believe she had won. I would let her fly across the ocean, holding hands with her husband, smug with victory, and while she wasted my money, I would prepare. The next morning, I called the one person Robert had always trusted outside our family, Marcus Peterson, the lawyer who handled small matters for him over the years. He had been at Robert's funeral, his handshake firm, his condolences sincere. "Mr. Peterson, this is Gloria Brooks," I said when he answered. "Mrs. Brooks, it's good to hear your voice. How are you holding up?" "I need to see you, urgently. I found something Robert left me, and I don't quite understand it." His tone shifted to professional concern. "Of course. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning?" "I'll be there." When I hung up, a calm washed over me. For the first time since Robert's death, I felt steady, purposeful. Angela thought she had written the ending of my story with one cruel phone call. But what she didn't know was that Robert had left me the pen. And now I was going to write a very different ending. As I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the envelope, I whispered to the air, "Robert, you always planned ahead. Now it's my turn." The day Angela boarded that plane to Europe, she didn't even bother stopping by to say goodbye. I watched from my kitchen window as a cab pulled up outside her building. Edward swaggered down the steps carrying 2 enormous suitcases, while Angela followed with a glossy carry-on that screamed luxury. They laughed together, kissed as if the world belonged to them, and slid into the cab without once glancing in my direction. I stood there with my cup of tea, invisible to my own daughter. For hours after they left, the silence in the house pressed on me. I wandered from room to room, touching the furniture Robert had polished, the photographs still hanging on the wall. Angela's smile as a child beamed at me from the frames, mocking me with the memory of innocence that no longer existed. She was gone, chasing a fantasy life, and I was left behind. But I was not powerless. Not anymore. A week passed before Angela's voice returned through the phone, syrupy sweet but lined with steel. "Mom, we made it to Paris. It's beautiful here. Oh, and we've already transferred the money from the house and the car, 30% of the total, straight into your account. That should help you while you find something smaller. We're so thoughtful, aren't we?" Something smaller. That was how she saw me, a frail old woman who needed to shrink, to disappear, to fit neatly into the corners of her life. I forced a smile into my voice. "Thank you, Angela. Have a safe trip." "See, I knew you'd understand. Love you, Mom." The line clicked dead, and I let out a laugh so sharp it startled even me. Love me? She loved what she could strip from me. She loved the idea of freedom, funded by my sacrifices. But me? No. That kind of love had vanished long ago. The following days became a routine of insult. Every time I checked my account, I saw the deposit she had so generously given me. Blood money. I walked through the neighbourhood, nodding at the whispers. Everyone believed the same story. Angela had left me with nothing. They pitied me, pitied the poor widow abandoned by her child. Even Lorraine from next door brought over a pot of soup one evening. "You let me know if you can't manage, Gloria. I'll help however I can." I thanked her, accepted the soup and smiled. Inside, I simmered. Their pity was my disguise. But Angela and Edward weren't done. A letter arrived 2 weeks later, typed neatly, almost formal. Angela's handwriting was scrawled at the bottom. "Mom, we've decided it's best for you to move into assisted living. We'll help sell your house to cover the costs. Don't worry, it's for your own good. For my own good. My grip on the paper tightened until it tore. Robert's letter echoed in my mind. Don't let anyone take this from you. Not even Angela. Especially not Angela. That night, I laid out the documents once again. The ledger stared back at me. Properties, bank accounts, shares. My entire life had been reduced to paper, yet on those papers I saw my future. Angela thought she was clever, that I would meekly sign whatever she placed in front of me, but she had underestimated me. The very next morning I put on my best wine-coloured dress, the one Robert always said made me look elegant, and took the bus downtown to Marcus Peterson's office. The marble floors gleamed under my feet, the tall windows spilling light across the waiting area. Marcus rose when I entered, his warm smile tinged with curiosity. "Mrs. Brooks, please, come in! What brings you here?" I placed the manila envelope on his desk. Robert left me this. His expression shifted the moment he skimmed the documents. His brows shot up, his lips parted. My God, Robert was a very smart man. "Mrs. Brooks, do you realize what you have here?" "I know enough," I said. "I know it's mine. What I need to know is what I can do legally." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Everything is in order. These documents are legitimate. You are the rightful owner of all these properties. And Mrs. Brooks... He tapped the deed to the lake house. "The sale Angela arranged, it was illegal. She had no authority. We can recover it immediately. We could even press charges for fraud." The words hung heavy in the air. Fraud. Charges. Against my own daughter. "No," I said firmly. "I don't want courtrooms. I don't want headlines. Not yet. I want this handled another way. Quietly." Marcus studied me. "Then what do you want, Mrs. Brooks?" I straightened in my chair, my voice steady. "I want my house back. I want control of every property, especially the building where Angela lives. And I don't want anyone to know I'm behind it. Not until I decide." He hesitated, then nodded. "It will take some time, but it can be done." "Do it," I said. When I left his office, I felt taller, stronger, as if Robert himself were walking beside me. The city streets bustled with people rushing, carrying their own burdens, their own secrets. Mine was heavier than most, but I carried it with purpose. That evening, Angela called again. She sounded cheerful, almost giddy. "Mom, we're having wine on the balcony in Rome. Edward says we'll triple our money in no time. Isn't that wonderful?" I let her talk. My eyes on Robert's documents spread across my kitchen table. I murmured, "Yes, honey, that sounds wonderful." What she didn't hear in my voice was the quiet promise I whispered once she hung up. "Enjoy it while you can." Weeks passed. Marcus called with updates. The fraudulent sale of the lake house had been overturned. The buyers were refunded and the property was legally back in my name. The Cadillac was more complicated, but he was working on it. The apartment building's ownership was being transferred directly to me. Piece by piece, Robert's empire was sliding back into my hands. Meanwhile, Angela posted photos online, her sipping champagne in Paris, Edward flashing expensive watches. To everyone else, she looked like a woman who had it all. But I knew better. I knew the debts Edward carried, the lies he spun. Their empire was built on sand, while mine was anchored in stone. The contrast couldn't have been clearer. Angela believed she had stripped me of everything. In reality, I was reclaiming it all, brick by brick, deed by deed, and I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. Because sooner or later, Angela would come back, and when she did, she would discover that the mother she abandoned wasn't weak, wasn't poor, and wasn't powerless. She was waiting, and she was ready. Angela's absence was a strange kind of relief. Without her hovering smile and Edward's calculating stare, the house felt like mine again. I moved through the rooms freely, opening curtains to let the sunlight pour in, polishing Robert's old chair until the wood gleamed. Yet beneath that peace, my mind churned with unease. I knew this silence was temporary. Angela was not the kind of woman to let go easily, and soon enough, the intrusion began. Letters arrived, stamped with urgency, each one a reminder of how far Angela's reach extended even across the ocean. One suggested assisted living arrangements. Another urged me to sign over power of attorney so she could handle my affairs responsibly. I tore them up one by one and tossed the scraps into the trash. But the violation lingered, sharp as broken glass. The neighbourhood watched me closely, pity in their eyes. At the corner store, Mrs. Jacobs lowered her voice. Gloria, honey, are you doing all right? I heard your daughter sold your car. I smiled tightly, answering only, I'm managing. People loved a story, and mine had become their entertainment. The abandoned widow, the mother cast aside, let them gossip. Their sympathy was my shield. Yet the real invasion was more intimate. Bills and financial documents began arriving at my door in Angela's handwriting, thinly veiled attempts at control. One afternoon I opened an envelope and found a typed ledger of my supposed monthly needs: groceries, utilities, medical expenses, each line calculated down to the penny. At the bottom, Angela had scrawled, Mom, with careful budgeting, you won't have to worry. We'll manage everything else. The insult stung. My life, my independence, reduced to a balance sheet created by the daughter I had raised. She thought I was a helpless child, incapable of handling the world without her guidance. She didn't know I was already handling far more than she could imagine. I laid Angela's ledger beside Robert's. The contrast made me laugh out loud. Hers was a list of crumbs, mine a feast hidden in plain sight. 6 properties, 3 companies, accounts that dwarfed her petty calculations. Robert's handwriting spoke across the years. You are richer than you know. Do not let her take it from you. That night, I picked up the phone and called Marcus Peterson again. Mr. Peterson, I need more than just the lake house back. I need every title secured, every deed in my name. Of course, he said calmly, but that means Angela will eventually notice. She may not take it well. I don't care, I answered. Do it quietly, but do it all. If my daughter wants to treat me like a burden, then I'll remind her whose name is on the door she walks through. The process began. Marcus moved discreetly, filing documents, reversing transactions, placing everything under my direct control. Each call from him steadied me, another stone laid in the fortress I was building. Meanwhile, Angela's tone grew bolder. Calls from Europe came at odd hours, her voice dripping with entitlement. Mom, we're investing in something big here, but Edward says it'll take more capital. We might need to sell your main house too. It's too much for you anyway. I bit back the fury boiling in my chest. We'll talk about it when you return. She huffed. Mom, you need to trust me. Trust. The word tasted bitter. Trust was what I had given her all my life. Trust was what she had shattered with every fraudulent sale, every lie whispered in Edward's ear. Days turned into weeks. I watched the mail carefully, shredding anything with Angela's name before it could worm its way into my home. Still, the weight of her shadow pressed on me. Even across the ocean, she tried to command my life. One evening, I sat with Lorraine on the porch. She sipped her tea, eyes watchful. Gloria, people say Angela's husband is drowning in debt that he borrowed against their apartment. I kept my face calm. Really? Yes, my cousin works at the bank. Edward's name is everywhere, loans, credit cards, unpaid bills. If it's true, it won't end well. I nodded, hiding the spark of satisfaction that lit inside me. The cracks were forming, exactly as I expected. That night I spread Robert's documents across the table again, arranging them carefully. The apartment building deed sat at the centre. The very walls Angela claimed as hers, the space she decorated with luxury, were mine. Legally, factually, undeniably mine. The power of that knowledge filled me with a strange calm. Angela thought she was stripping me of independence, but she lived in a house I could take from her with a single signature. She thought she was reducing me to a budget, but she was the one shackled to debts she couldn't escape. I realised then what Robert had done. He hadn't just left me money, he had left me a weapon. Angela's control over me was an illusion, and illusions only last until the truth is revealed. She didn't know it yet, but her empire was built on sand. The tide was coming in. A week later, Marcus called with news. Mrs. Brooks, the transfer for the apartment building is complete. You have full authority now. Good, I said softly. Keep everything in my name. And Marcus? Yes. No one can know. Not Angela. Not yet. He paused. You're planning something, aren't you? I smiled, though he couldn't see it. I'm planning to remind my daughter who I am. That evening, I poured myself a glass of Robert's favourite bourbon. I sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker like stars. Angela believed I was weak, that I would follow her instructions like a child. But she had no idea. She didn't see the woman Robert saw, the woman who had survived poverty, exhaustion, loss, and still stood. Angela thought she was in control, but soon she would learn that the mother she abandoned was not the victim in this story. She was the storm. The first time I told Marcus I wanted to meet with him face to face about taking legal control of everything, his eyebrows rose. "Mrs. Brooks, you already have control," he said. "Robert's documents are airtight. The law is on your side." I leaned forward across his polished desk. "No, Marcus. I don't just want control on paper. I want every lock changed, every account secured, every loophole closed. My daughter and her husband believe they can play games with me. I want them to realize the game was over before it began." He regarded me for a long moment before nodding. Understood. As I walked back to the bus stop that afternoon, the Chicago wind sharp against my face, I felt lighter. Every step was a declaration. I was not a pawn in Angela's schemes. I was the queen, and the board was mine. Still, the calls from Europe came regularly, slicing into my resolve like rusted knives. Angela's tone shifted depending on her mood. Some days she was affectionate. "Mom, I hope you're eating well. I miss you so much." Other days she was commanding. "Mom, don't forget to look into that senior apartment. Edward and I can't handle your house forever." Each time I answered with a calmness that must have unnerved her. "We'll see, Angela. We'll see." What she didn't know was that I had already instructed Marcus to begin the eviction process for her apartment. It felt brutal, almost unimaginable, forcing my own daughter out of her home. But was it truly hers? Robert's name, then mine, had been on the deed for a decade. Edward had borrowed against it recklessly, thinking it belonged to him. He didn't even know he was a tenant in my empire. Marcus called with updates. "The fraudulent sale of the lake house is fully nullified. The buyers received their money back and have no further claim. It's yours again." I closed my eyes, picturing the porch by the water, Robert grilling fish, Angela laughing as a teenager. That house was more than property. It was memory. Now it was back where it belonged. "And the Cadillac?" I asked. "That one's more complicated. Angela sold it under a power of attorney you signed, likely without realizing. We'll need to prove coercion or deception. But I'll handle it." I thanked him, hung up, and stared at the phone. Angela had tricked me into signing those papers during Robert's funeral when my mind was fogged with grief. I remembered her sliding a stack across the table, saying softly, "It's just for the funeral expenses, Mom, don't worry." I had signed without reading. My trust had been her weapon, but now my trust was gone. One evening, Lorraine knocked on my door, her face flushed with gossip. "Gloria, did you hear? Edward's debts are catching up with him. My brother-in-law at the bank says he's being investigated. Loans, credit cards, he's drowning." I offered her tea, feigning surprise. "Really?" Poor Angela. Inside, my pulse quickened. The cracks in Angela's world were widening, just as I had expected. Later that night, Angela called from an unfamiliar number. Her voice trembled at the edges, though she tried to hide it. "Mom, Edward's business in Europe is complicated. We might need you to sign a few things to help us with the bank. Just temporary, of course, nothing serious." I kept my tone even. "Send them to Marcus Peterson. He'll handle everything." There was a pause, then a nervous laugh. "Oh, Mom, that's not necessary. It's just family paperwork." "No, Angela," I said firmly. "From now on, everything goes through the lawyer." Her silence on the other end was thick, suffocating. Finally she muttered, "Fine, suit yourself." The call ended, and I knew the distance between us had grown into a canyon. A week later, Marcus rang again. "Mrs. Brooks, it's done. You now have undisputed control over every property, and the eviction notice for Angela's apartment is prepared. We can serve it as soon as you approve." I stared at the papers on my kitchen table, the weight of the decision pressing on me. Could I really do it? Could I really force my own child to face the consequences of her choices so directly? I thought of Robert's last words, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled at me that final morning. "Don't let anyone take this from you." His voice was clear in my head. Yes, I could. "Serve it," I told Marcus. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker, imagining Angela's face when she returned from Europe to find her home no longer hers. She would rage, she would cry, she would accuse me of cruelty. But she would learn. She would finally see that love is not a license to steal, that family does not mean immunity from consequence. And yet, beneath my determination, my heart ached. I remembered Angela as a little girl, clutching her teddy bear, whispering, "Mommy, promise you'll never leave me." I had promised, and in my own way I was keeping that promise. I would never leave her, but I would also never let her destroy what Robert and I built. When Marcus called again to confirm the notice had been filed, I whispered to myself, "It's done." From that moment, I was no longer the grieving widow waiting for pity. I was the keeper of Robert's legacy, the guardian of everything we had earned. Angela thought she had broken me with a single phone call from a doctor's waiting room. She thought I was powerless, stranded, left with scraps. But she was about to learn the truth. Her mother was not the victim. Her mother was the judge, and Judgment Day was coming. The day Angela returned was not announced with flowers or apologies. It came with whispers. Lorraine knocked on my door in the early morning, her eyes wide with the thrill of neighbourhood news. "Gloria, your daughter's back. I saw her at the building last night, alone. Just one suitcase, dragging it like it weighed her whole life. She looked awful. Thin, pale, like she hadn't slept in weeks." I thanked Lorraine, closed the door and leaned against it, my pulse racing. I had been waiting for this moment, rehearsing it in my mind for months. Angela, stripped of her confidence, returning not with triumph, but with desperation. The time had come. That afternoon, Marcus called. "Mrs. Brooks, the eviction notice was delivered. The doorman confirmed Angela received it personally." "Good," I said, my voice calm though my hands trembled. "Let her sit with it. Let her feel the weight." That night, sleep eluded me. I lay awake imagining her reaction. The confusion, the disbelief, the anger. Perhaps she thought it was a mistake, a scam. Perhaps she was pacing that apartment, dialing Edward's number, only to find it disconnected. Perhaps she was realising, for the first time, how fragile her world really was. At 8 in the morning, the phone rang. I knew who it was before I answered. "Mom." Angela's voice was raw, stripped of arrogance. "I need to talk to you, urgently." "Good morning, honey," I said softly, savouring the reversal. "How was Europe? Mom, this isn't funny. I got a letter, an eviction notice. It says I have 30 days to leave my apartment. Do you know anything about this?" "An eviction notice? From who?" I asked, feigning surprise. "From a company called Robert Investments, Inc. Have you ever heard of them?" "Robert, my Robert." I smiled into the receiver. "No, dear, that doesn't sound familiar." Her breath hitched. "Mom, I don't know what to do. Edward's gone. He stayed in Europe, left me for some waitress in Paris. And now this. I have nowhere to go." The irony cut deep. She had abandoned me with a 2-minute phone call, and now she begged for refuge. "I'm sorry, honey," I said gently. "Where are you now?" "In the apartment, but I don't know for how long. Can I come stay with you? Just until I figure things out?" The question I had been waiting for. The child who cast me aside, now crawling back to the home she once tried to sell. "Of course, Angela," I said warmly. "This will always be your home." She burst into tears. "Thank you, Mom. I'll be there soon." When I hung up, I caught my reflection in the mirror. My face was calm, almost serene. I tied my hair in a bun, put on my most conservative grey dress, and practiced the look of a worried but forgiving mother. Angela would see what she expected, a fragile widow, still longing for her daughter's love. She would never suspect the steel beneath the surface. An hour later, the doorbell rang. When I opened it, I barely recognised her. Angela's expensive coat hung loose on her shoulders, her makeup smudged, her eyes hollow from sleepless nights. She looked at me as if searching for salvation. "Mom," she whispered, stepping inside. For a moment I thought she might hug me, but she stopped short, remembering the cruelty of her departure. "Come in, honey," I said softly. "Do you want some coffee?" We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Robert once spread the morning paper, where Angela used to eat pancakes before school. Now she hunched over it like a beggar, clutching her cup as if it could warm her soul. "Mom, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "The way I left, the things I said, I don't know what came over me." "It's in the past," I replied, though my memory burned with every word she had thrown like knives. "No, it's not. I treated you horribly. And now Edward." She stopped, tears spilling down her cheeks. "He lied to me, Mom. There was never any business in Europe. It was all a scam to escape his debts. He used me! And now the banks are after me too. They say since we were married I'm responsible." Her misery was almost pitiful. Almost. But I remembered the coldness in her voice the day she sold my house. I remembered the arrogance dripping from her words. It's for your own good. What will you do now? I asked gently. I don't know. I don't have money. I don't have a job. I don't even have a place to live. That's why I came here. I need you, Mom. Please. She reached across the table, her hands trembling. For a fleeting moment, my mother's heart stirred. I wanted to pull her into my arms, tell her everything would be okay. But I held back. She needed to feel the consequences, to sit in the ruins of the empire she built on betrayal. You can stay here as long as you need, I said instead. Rest, recover, then we'll see what your options are. Her relief flooded the room. She even managed a weak smile, as if she couldn't believe forgiveness had come so easily. Thank you, Mom. I promise I'll find a job soon. I won't be a burden. I nodded, sipping my coffee. Inwardly, I smiled. She believed she had found refuge. She believed she was safe. But this was only the beginning. That night, Angela unpacked her 2 suitcases in her old bedroom, the one still painted in faded lavender from her teenage years. I watched from the doorway as she moved about, her shoulders sagging with humiliation. She had gone from luxury condos in Chicago and Parisian apartments to sleeping beneath the posters of long-forgotten pop stars. She turned to me, holding a manila envelope. Mom, I found this among Edward's things. It has your name on it. My breath caught. Another envelope. Robert's handwriting again, but this one newer, smaller. May I see it? I asked. Inside was a short letter and a small key. The letter read, Gloria, if you're reading this after opening the first envelope, it means Angela is in trouble. This key opens a safety deposit box at the central bank, number 247. Inside is something that may help you help her. Use it wisely. With eternal love, Robert. Angela gasped, reading over my shoulder. A safety deposit box? Dad had a safety deposit box. Mom, we have to go see what's inside. I closed the envelope slowly, my heart pounding. Robert, always one step ahead, always leaving me the tools to decide. Maybe, I said carefully. Tomorrow. Angela's eyes lit with desperate hope. She had no idea the game had already shifted. She thought salvation might lie in a box downtown. She didn't realize it had been in my hands all along. The next morning, Angela hovered in the kitchen like a restless child. She had cooked breakfast, burnt eggs and watery grits, but the effort itself surprised me. She set the plate before me, her hands trembling. Mom, after we eat, can we go to the bank? Please, I need to know what's in that box. I studied her face. There was no trace of the polished, self-assured woman who once barked orders over the phone. This was a woman stripped of illusions, clinging to the hope that her father had left her one last gift. All right, I said finally. We'll go. The walk downtown was quiet. Angela walked half a step behind me, her head lowered, as if ashamed to be seen. When we reached the bank, the marble lobby felt cold, impersonal. A clerk checked my ID, then led us to the vault area. The metallic clink of the key sliding into the safety deposit box echoed like a drumbeat in my ears. Inside were velvet pouches, glittering necklaces, heavy rings, and a letter. Robert's handwriting again. Gloria, these jewels are family heirlooms and investments. Their value is approximately $200,000. Use them as you see fit. They are yours, but if Angela is with you, consider whether they might help her learn what truly matters. Angela's gasp filled the small room. She lifted a necklace, emeralds catching the dim light. Mom, this is worth a fortune. We can sell these, pay off debts, get back on our feet. I closed the box slowly. Are you sure you want to use your father's inheritance to pay Edward's debts? What choice do I have? She snapped, then softened. If I don't pay something, the banks will take everything. They'll ruin me, Mom. I said nothing, only handed the jewels back to the clerk for safekeeping. On the bus ride home, Angela stared out the window, clutching the envelope to her chest as if it were life itself. That night, she spread the jewels across the kitchen table, scribbling numbers on scraps of paper. If I sell this necklace, I can get $50,000. The rings may be $30,000. It's not enough for everything, but it'll keep the collectors at bay. Her voice carried desperation, but her eyes still gleamed with calculation. Even now, she thought only of Edward, of salvaging his wreckage. I watched her carefully. She had not yet learned. Later, as she slept in her old room, I sat with a glass of bourbon and called Marcus. I need you to dig deeper into Edward's debts, I told him. He sighed. It won't be pretty, Mrs. Brooks. but I'll get the full picture." 3 days later, his voice was grave over the phone. "It's worse than I thought. Edward owes over $200,000 to multiple banks and private lenders. Some of the documents have Angela's forged signature. Legally, she's responsible, unless we can prove fraud." My grip tightened on the receiver. "Can we?" "With the right evidence, yes, but it will take time, maybe weeks, and it won't be cheap." "Do whatever it takes," I said. "But don't tell Angela." "Not yet." That evening, Angela returned from the jewellery store with a wad of cash and hollow eyes. $180,000, she muttered, counting the bills on the table. "It's not what I hoped, but it's enough to start." I watched her clutch the money, her hands shaking. She thought she was saving herself, when in truth, I was already saving her behind the curtain. Over the following days, Angela tried to live like someone responsible. She skipped dinners out, bought cheap groceries, even considered part-time work. Yet every choice was laced with regret, every word dripping with what she had lost. "If only Edward had been honest," she whispered one night. "If only I hadn't been so blind." I wanted to tell her then, to reveal that her father's empire still stood, stronger than ever, and that I was the one holding it. But I kept silent. She needed to hit rock bottom. Only then could she climb out on her own. One night, she broke down completely. She sat at the kitchen table, tears staining the paper she had been organising. "Mom, I ruined everything. I took your house, your car, your life, and for what? A man who left me in Paris with nothing. I'm sorry, I don't deserve your forgiveness." I reached across the table, laying my hand over hers. "You're still my daughter. That will never change." She sobbed harder, burying her face in her hands. For the first time, I felt a flicker of real remorse in her, not just fear. It gave me hope. But the lesson wasn't complete. Not yet. Marcus called again the next morning. "Mrs. Brooks, we found solid evidence. Edward falsified documents intentionally. With this, Angela can be cleared of all responsibility, but I'll need your approval to proceed." I stared out the window, watching Angela sweep the porch, her shoulders slumped. "Proceed," I said quietly. "But don't tell her. Not until everything is final." When I hung up, I whispered to myself, "Soon, Robert, soon she'll understand." Angela came inside, her face flushed from the effort. She looked at me with tired eyes. "Mom, I got offered a night job cleaning offices. It's not glamorous, but it's something," I nodded. "Take it. Work is work. It will teach you what money never could." She managed a faint smile. "Maybe you're right." That night, as she left for her first shift, she paused at the door. "Thank you for letting me stay here, Mom, even after everything." I watched her walk away, her shoulders squared with determination, and I knew then the transformation had begun. Angela thought she was fighting for survival, clinging to scraps of jewellery and part-time wages. She didn't know the truth, that her mother held the keys to an empire, that her father's foresight had already freed her from ruin. But soon she would know, and when she did, she would never look at me the same way again. The knock at the door that afternoon was sharp, insistent, too precise to be Lorraine dropping off gossip. I opened to find a woman in a navy blazer with a laminated badge on a chain. Her smile was professional, practiced. Behind her stood a man in a plain suit, his posture official. "Mrs. Brooks?" the woman asked. "I'm Carla Hayes with Adult Protective Services. This is Detective Reyes with the 7th District." My stomach went cold. "Is something wrong?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. Carla's smile softened. "We received an anonymous report alleging possible financial exploitation and neglect. Someone expressed concern that you may be being taken advantage of and that your daughter may have sold property without proper authority." For a beat, the words did not land. Then they hit like stones. "Who would?" I started. The room blurred for a second. The kitchen tiles, the photograph of Robert smiling on the mantel. "I'm fine. I handle my affairs." Detective Reyes folded his hands. "We're required to follow up on any report. It's routine. We'll ask you some questions and do a welfare check. Could we come in?" Angela, who had been in the living room folding a shirt, stood up so fast she knocked the table. "Mom, I didn't." Her voice wobbled between panic and forced composure. "I called because I was worried about you leaving everything unattended." Carla inclined her head. "We appreciate family concerns, Mom, but we have to do our own assessment." As they moved through the house, I watched the polished movements of professionals turn my kitchen into an interrogation room. They asked about my medical history, who visited, where my money came from. I answered each question with the truth, though truth suddenly felt like a fragile thing that could be bent by a shred of paper or a whispered lie. Then Detective Reyes asked the one question I hadn't expected. Do you have any documents proving ownership of your properties? I felt panic for a moment. What if the envelope had been misplaced? But the manila packet lay safe in my dresser drawer. Robert's handwriting still looked like a promise on the front. I reached for it, hands unsteady, and pulled it from under my pillow. Angela's face tightened when she saw me reach. Is that yours, Mrs. Brooks? Carla asked. It is, I said. My husband left these for me. They took the papers carefully, reverent in their own way, flipping through deeds, bank statements, a letter in Robert's hand. Detective Reyes' brow furrowed. Some of these transactions look irregular. We may need to place a temporary hold while we verify authenticity and make sure you're not being taken advantage of. A tightness wrapped around my chest. Hold? On what grounds? Well, Mrs. Brooks, Carla said, voice gentle, given the report and the need to ensure your welfare, we're going to request a temporary freeze on large transfers and sales tied to these properties until we complete our evaluation. That's standard procedure in suspected exploitation cases. Angela's eyes snapped to mine, and I read her confusion and panic, like open script. Mom, that's terrible. We were just trying to... She stopped herself. The truth was a jagged thing lodged in her throat. Detective Reyes closed the folder. Also, Mrs. Brooks, we'll need to arrange for a cognitive screening with a physician. It's standard to ensure you're making decisions that align with your capacity. We'll schedule it through the hospital. My heartbeat thudded so loudly I thought they could hear it. A cognitive screening? I echoed. I'm a nurse. I know what's involved. Carla's eyes were sympathetic but firm. It's just an assessment. It will take 30 minutes and then we'll know where things stand. As they left, the house felt different, smaller, like a stage on which a drama was unfolding without my consent. I sat at the table, the documents that had been in my hands minutes ago now out of reach, and Angela paced, her hands clasped tight. Mom, we have to tell them everything, she said. If they think you're being exploited... Her voice trailed off, the sentence unfinished and damning. No, I said. We tell them the truth. We say Robert left these to me. We say the sales were unauthorized. We say whatever needs saying, without adding a story that makes you the victim. She looked at me with something like hunger, an animal's desperation. They could keep your accounts frozen, she said. I'll be ruined. You'll be fine, I replied, more firmly than I felt. The freeze is temporary. Marcus will handle the legal paperwork. We'll cooperate. But I want the assessments to happen here, with me present. I won't be moved into some facility because someone decided I'm incompetent. That night, sleep refused me. I lay awake, listening to the city hum, thinking of Robert's last smile. An anonymous tip. Who would turn on me? My stomach twisted with the knowledge that the world was full of people willing to surf the tides of rumour for sport, and that sometimes the people closest to you could be the hand that shoved you in. The next morning, a nurse from the hospital arrived with a clipboard and bright eyes. Dr. Patel, she called herself, a geriatrician with a voice like sympathy and efficiency. The screening was clinical, and clinical felt invasive. She asked me to recall recent events, to draw a clock, to identify family members and where I lived. I answered each item with crispness. My years as a nurse had trained me to stay lucid under pressure. Yet they wrote notes as if labelling me on paper, possible vulnerability, needs monitoring. When Detective Reyes called a week later to say the preliminary hold on major transfers was in effect, something icy and immediate settled inside me, a new urgency. Marcus's calls were brisk. We can fight this, Gloria, but the temporary freeze complicates the process. We can't transfer titles while the investigation is open. We need to prove the sales were fraudulent and that you are competent to make your own decisions. And Angela, I asked. The question felt small and enormous at once. There's an anonymous complainant who claimed you were isolated and manipulated, Marcus said. We'll trace the origin, but it may involve subpoenas. There is the risk that the source is very close to home. A silence spread between us like a cracking glass about to split. I had planned a slow, controlled reveal, the mother who let her daughter fall so she could learn. I had not planned for outside hands, official, cold, to pry my life apart. Someone had taken my private war and dragged it into the public square. Late that night, Angela stood in my doorway, eyes rimmed red. "Mom, if this is about me," she began. "If this is about you," I cut in, not unkind but precise, "then tell the truth. You sold the lake house without authority, Angela. That is fraud." Her shoulders shook. I panicked. I didn't know what else to do when Edward... She choked on the name, and for a second I saw a face raw and fearful. "I thought I could fix it." "You thought you could fix it by breaking your mother," I said softly. "We will deal with the consequences." She nodded, a small defeated movement. "I didn't call APS," she whispered. "I swear to God." I believed her, and yet a line of doubt ran cold through me. Who had sent the report? Who had pointed a finger and turned our private reckoning into someone else's business? Outside, the city moved on indifferent to the tremor that had begun in my kitchen. A bureaucratic hand on my life, a temporary lock on my chances. The twist had arrived, unexpected, intrusive, dangerous. It forced my plan to speed up and to become uglier than I'd intended. But even as fear threaded through me, something steadier took hold. Resolve. If someone wanted to challenge my competence, I would show them my clarity. If they wanted to freeze my assets, I would thaw them with truth and law. Then the game had shifted, the rules were not the ones I chose. But I would play anyway, and I would win. The air in Marcus's office felt heavier than usual when I walked in with Angela at my side. She looked smaller somehow, diminished, clutching her purse like it was the last rope keeping her from falling. Marcus gestured for us to sit, his face composed but serious. On the desk lay 2 folders, one thick and worn, the other slim and crisp. "Mrs. Brooks, Miss Brooks," he began. "I have news, both good and bad. Which would you like first?" "Start with the bad," I said. Marcus nodded. The investigation by Adult Protective Services has officially frozen your major accounts and property transfers for 30 days. Until then, you cannot move funds or sell assets without approval. They want to ensure no exploitation is happening." Angela gasped. "But that means we can't." She stopped herself, cheeks flushing. Marcus continued. "However, the good news is this. We have undeniable proof that Edward falsified documents with your signature, Miss Brooks. That evidence clears you of liability for nearly all his debts. The remaining balances are solely in his name. He is being pursued internationally, and with the fraud charges in France, he will not be able to hide." Angela's mouth fell open. "So I'm free?" Marcus nodded. "Legally, yes, you won't have to repay Edward's loans, but the freeze on your mother's assets complicates things. We'll need to present these findings in court and show that Mrs. Brooks is both competent and in control." Angela turned to me, eyes shining with both relief and shame. "Mom, you saved me." I shook my head. "Robert saved you. He planned for this. I only followed his path." Marcus slid the second folder across the desk. Inside are the deeds, the bank statements, and the shares Robert left behind. "Mrs. Brooks, you own everything. The building Angela lived in, the lake house, multiple properties. You are, without question, a wealthy woman." Angela's hands trembled as she opened the folder. Page after page of evidence spilled out. Titles, balances, certificates. Her expression shifted from disbelief to shock, then finally to comprehension. "Mom," she whispered. "All this time you knew?" "Yes." Her eyes brimmed with tears. "You let me think we were broke. You let me scrub floors at night, cry myself to sleep, sell your jewels. You could have stopped it." My voice was steady. "If I had rescued you right away, you would have learned nothing. You would have gone on believing money was the answer, that betrayal had no consequence. I needed you to see what life feels like without shortcuts. I needed you to understand dignity." She covered her face with her hands, sobbing. "I treated you like garbage. I took everything Dad built and threw it away. And you still chose to save me." I reached for her hands, pulling them down gently. "I saved you in the only way I knew would last, by letting you hit rock bottom so you could climb out with your own strength." The room fell silent. Even Marcus, who had witnessed countless family disputes, looked away, giving us space. Angela sniffled, her voice breaking. "I don't deserve it." "Maybe not," I said softly. "But grace isn't about deserving. It's about choosing to love anyway." She looked at me then with something I hadn't seen in years. Respect. Not the shallow gratitude of a spoiled daughter, but the reverence of a woman who finally understood the weight of sacrifice. Marcus cleared his throat. Mrs. Brooks, I'll continue pressing APS to lift the freeze early. The evidence of your competence and ownership should resolve it, but in the meantime, discretion is crucial. If Angela lives with you, neighbours will talk. The investigation feeds on rumour. I know, I said. We'll endure it. On the ride home, Angela was quiet, staring out the window. At last, she whispered, Mom, when I scrubbed those offices, I felt something I'd never felt before. Shame, yes, but also pride. For the first time, I earned my way. I don't want to lose that, even knowing about Dad's money. I want to keep working. Her words warmed me more than any account balance. Then work, Angela. Work until you know who you are without anyone else propping you up. She nodded, wiping her tears. And maybe one day I can be the daughter you deserved. I touched her hand. Be the woman you deserve first. The daughter will follow. As the car carried us back to my modest home, I felt Robert's presence stronger than ever. His plan had been brutal, but it was working. Our daughter was not destroyed. She was being remade. And soon, when the freeze lifted, the empire he built would be ours again, guarded not by secrecy, but by the lessons carved into the heart of a once-lost child. The courtroom was colder than I expected, the hum of fluorescent lights filling the silence as Angela and I took our seats behind Marcus. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair tied in a bun, shuffled through the stack of documents before her. On the opposite side sat the representative from Adult Protective Services, flanked by their attorney, faces expressionless. All rise, the bailiff intoned. We stood, my knees stiff but steady. I met the judge's eyes for the briefest moment, and in that instant I knew Robert was with me. The proceedings began with formalities, but it wasn't long before the APS attorney spoke. Your Honour, we received an anonymous tip alleging that Mrs. Gloria Brooks, age 68, was the victim of financial exploitation by her daughter. In response, we placed a temporary freeze on her assets to prevent further harm. We now seek clarity regarding her competency and ownership of the properties in question. The words sliced through the air and all eyes turned toward me. I held my breath, then exhaled slowly. This was my moment. Marcus rose smoothly. Your Honour, what APS fails to mention is that Mrs. Brooks' late husband, Robert Brooks, left behind extensive documentation proving that she is the sole legal owner of multiple properties and accounts. Furthermore, we have evidence that Mrs. Brooks' daughter was herself deceived by her husband, Edward Miller, who forged her signature on fraudulent loans. We will demonstrate not only Mrs. Brooks' competence, but also the deliberate fraud that necessitated her silence until now. The judge adjusted her glasses. Very well, proceed. Marcus handed over Robert's envelope, each deed and certificate in pristine order. He then submitted the bank records and the notarized letter Robert had written, stating explicitly that everything belonged to me. The courtroom was silent as the judge read, her expression unreadable. Then it was my turn. Mrs. Brooks, the APS attorney said, can you explain in your own words how you manage your affairs? I stood, smoothing the fabric of my dress. I worked as a nurse for 40 years. I paid bills, I budgeted, I managed a household. When my husband passed, he left me with instructions. I have followed them carefully. I know exactly what I own, and I am capable of protecting it. And your daughter? The attorney pressed. Was she involved in the sale of your lake house and vehicle? I looked at Angela, who sat trembling beside me. Yes, she sold them without authority. But I will say this, she was misled. She believed her husband's lies. She made terrible choices, but she has learned from them. She is not my exploiter. She is my child. Angela's tears fell silently, her face pale. For the first time, she raised her head and said, Your Honour, my mother is telling the truth. I betrayed her trust, but she is strong, stronger than anyone gives her credit for. If anything, I was the one who was vulnerable. She deserves her freedom back. The judge studied us both. After a long pause, she spoke. I have reviewed the evidence, the testimony, and the medical assessment. It is clear Mrs. Brooks is of sound mind and fully capable of managing her affairs. The freeze is hereby lifted. All properties and accounts are restored to her control. The gavel struck, sharp as thunder. The sound reverberated through me like liberation. Angela grasped my hand, her tears falling freely. Mom, I'm so sorry for everything. I squeezed her fingers, not with the blind forgiveness of before, but with measured grace. It's over now, but remember, Angela, every choice leaves a mark. What matters is what you do from here. As we left the courtroom, the winter sunlight broke through the clouds, spilling warmth on my face. For the first time since Robert's death, I felt whole again. The law had spoken, justice had prevailed, and I had not only survived, I had triumphed. Life after the courtroom felt strangely quiet, like the air after a storm. The papers were back in my possession, the accounts unfrozen, the titles secure. For the first time in months, I could walk through my home without the weight of suspicion pressing on my chest. But silence has its own questions, and mine came in the form of a daughter sitting across from me at the kitchen table, eyes red from crying, but clearer than they had ever been. "Mom," Angela said softly, "what happens now? Do I stay here forever? Do I try to start over somewhere else?" I sipped my tea, considering. "That depends on you. This is your home, yes, but I don't want you to stay out of guilt or desperation. You must decide whether to live as a woman who hides from her past or as one who rebuilds." She nodded, her hands twisting in her lap. "I don't want to run anymore. I thought I could escape everything with Edward. Money, responsibility, even you. But all I did was dig a hole deeper than I could climb out of. I need to face what I've done. I need to earn something for myself." Her words struck me like scripture. This was not the daughter who once sold my house with a laugh. This was a woman standing at the edge of redemption. "Then you must start small," I said. "Work, study, rebuild your dignity brick by brick. Your father left us wealth, but that wealth is not a cure. It is a test. It can rot you or it can strengthen you. The choice is yours." Angela's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they didn't fall. She reached across the table and took my hand. "I want to do better. I want to be someone Dad would be proud of, someone you can respect." I squeezed her fingers. "Respect is not given, Angela. It is earned. Every day." The following weeks brought changes neither of us expected. Angela kept her cleaning job, even though she no longer needed it. She said the work grounded her, reminded her of humility. She enrolled in night classes at the community college, talking about studying social work to help women who had been abandoned, women like her. Neighbours began to notice. Lorraine stopped me on the sidewalk one morning. "Gloria, I've seen Angela. She looks different, humble. I don't know what you did, but you brought her back down to earth." I smiled faintly. Sometimes the earth is the only place to build again. Inside, I watched Angela with a cautious hope. She cooked meals, washed dishes without complaint, even volunteered at the local church pantry. There was a gentleness in her now, born from suffering, shaped by consequence. And yet, doubt lingered. Could this transformation last? Or would the allure of money and easy escape tempt her again? Only time would tell. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Angela sat beside me on the porch. She looked at the horizon and whispered, "Mom, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but can you ever truly forgive me?" I turned to her, my heart heavy with truth. "I forgave you long ago, but forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. The scars remain, Angela. They always will, but scars are proof we survived." She leaned her head against my shoulder, silent tears wetting my sleeve. For the first time since Robert's death, I felt something close to peace. Tomorrow would bring new trials, new choices. Whether Angela stayed on this path or strayed again, only she could decide. My role was no longer to shield her, but to witness her, to remind her of the cost of betrayal and the value of love. The story was not over, it never would be, but for now we were mother and daughter again. Not perfect, not whole, but alive, with the chance to begin anew. When the house finally grew quiet that night, I sat alone on the porch with Robert's old bourbon glass in my hand. The stars stretched wide across the sky, and I imagined his voice among them, calm and steady. "You did it, Gloria. You stood tall." Angela was asleep inside, in the same lavender-painted room she had once filled with teenage laughter. Now it held her shame, her lessons, and maybe her rebirth. She had fallen lower than I thought possible. But in falling, she had learned what I could never have taught her with words alone. Still, the question lingered in me like a splinter. Had I gone too far? I could have saved her months of suffering. I could have stepped in the moment she betrayed me. Instead, I let her feel the full weight of her choices. Was that cruelty, or was it the only way to save her from herself? The neighbours would never understand, and perhaps the world wouldn't either. They would see only a mother who allowed her daughter to stumble, who held her secrets close while her child drowned in consequences. But I know the truth. Sometimes the deepest love is the harshest teacher. And so I ask you, if it were your child, would you have done the same? Would you forgive so easily? Or would you let them suffer to truly learn? Tell me in the comments. Share your truth. But because this story is not just mine, it belongs to every parent, every child, every family who has walked the fine line between love and betrayal. If you believe these stories matter, don't forget to like, subscribe and support so more voices can be heard. The choice is yours, just as it was mine.